difference. They are champions in our traditional institutions.
Let's address something I might say it seems to be like the elephant in the room. Because when many of the structural issues that have been highlighted today about patriarchal behaviors and structural challenges, laws and policies seem to go to the culture, both the traditional culture, but the culture of our institutions and the culture of governance in Africa. And yet, the truth is that there's no uniform culture in Africa. When we talk about patriarchy and the patrilineal societies, many societies in Africa are also matrilineal, where the women are the kings and the chiefs, or the paramount chiefs, as they are called in multiple places, and wield significant power. And there are also parts in Africa where someone who, in the English, in the common understanding of chief, is a very ordinary person. I was once in a country where we had a local event, and the county commissioner and myself were the ones sitting at the high table, and the person called chief was literally standing guard by the entry. And I was flabbergasted. I was stupefied, because that wasn't my understanding of chief. But the challenge is that we keep ascribing these issues, these gender roles in society. There's a strong resistance in the continent, or parts of the continent, and people think this idea of equality, of the roles of women in our society, that these are imported notions that can actually destroy the social fabric of our society. So as one of the most prominent kings in West Africa, what's your take? How do you interpret this as a leader of a people, a community, of a nation, about the role of culture in society?
Thank you very much, Ozonnia. You know, women had their places in the society. They had equality. And then it was lost at some point. Maybe during colonialism. And the challenge we have now is to restore that equality. Traditionally, and I'll refer to my own community, Onitsha, which I think is exemplary of the people of the southeast of Nigeria, the Igbo-speaking people, that from ancestral times, women and men, though they had different roles in the society, were regarded as equal. The men went to the farm, and the women did the trading, and then they looked after the family also. And women had their organizations, and the men had their organizations, and they ran parallel. And there's no sense of disequality. And to give an example, for instance, in the colonial days, when the colonial regime were imposing taxes, arbitrary taxes in various parts of the country, it was in the southeast, the Igbo women, who resisted that, and they called it Aba Women's Revolt. One, it was not specific to Aba, but the women from various communities rallied into Aba, and they challenged the colonial government, and the colonial government rolled back on taxation, and for several years there was no taxation in that area. You remember in Western Nigeria also, much more recently, Mrs. Fumilayo Ransom Kuti was also a leader in the resistance of what was deemed not appropriate for the women and ultimately for the society. But then, having said that, it's true also that when modern education came and school fees had to be paid, oftentimes in those days, the women were married off early to earn the bride price to pay the school fees for the men, because the men were seen as continuity for the family, being a patrilineal society. But that's gone because there's education for everybody. And today, I can talk about Anambra State and probably Enugu State also. We have more women in school than men. Primary school, secondary school, universities. So the men are the endangered species. They go into trade, and they go into Yahoo and other things that you could think about. So the pattern is coming back. Okay, but the challenge I have as the leader of my community, and by the way, as of today, I still straddle the corporate side, the corporate sector, and the traditional community sector. All the discussions we've had today is about power, about inclusiveness, all at the professional corporate level. But then, more than 50% of the African population are women. The majority of that 50% or more are in the rural areas. And my challenge is, how do I empower these women? How do I grow wealth amongst them? How do I give them courage and self-esteem, etc., etc. Because all our educated women, like Nkiru, are powering away all over the world. But then, a small gap between our professional women and our rural women. And we have a solution, because thanks to COVID forced us to advance all the development programs we had for the community. And we have what we call the Women Empowerment Project Committee now, as a part of one of our operational arms for community development. Today, we have a health insurance program. We have various programs for both the mother, females, and the men. And as I speak also, from last year, we have our own quote-unquote banking system, which does not meet the standards of our Nigerian banks. Because if you go through the standard of Nigerian banks, all those rural women cannot qualify to get a loan. But we've created a fund managed by ourselves, and we're giving them loans and managing them very closely, and there's hardly any default. And we're growing wealth because their businesses are growing, and so on and so forth, and so forth. And this year, again, how do you use your handset to do your business, make payments and receive payments, etc., etc. So we try to close the gap, and it's our professional women who are driving all of this. So we're closing the gap to bring the level of our rural women, to higher and higher levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Really fascinating. And there are three issues I want to tease out, but I'll take you further on just one of them. The first is the undercurrent that's animated all of our conversations since this morning about opportunities for women, and that actually all of us here are the converted. So we're speaking to each other. And so this platform should be an opportunity to take the conversation beyond. But how do we empower women when the instruments of empowerment differentiate the majority of women who are in the communities? How do you enable them to have access to credit or financial instruments that don't speak the language of the current framework for financial institutions? And so my sister from the Bank of Industry and the others, you don't need to respond today, but I think that's a challenge. If we cannot create instruments that do empower and don't speak the orthodoxy, but speak to the needs of the time, and I think that will be extremely helpful. The second, of course, the issue that you highlight is the fact that the rural women, there are many who are outside this conversation, and the empowerment should not just be about those of us who are educated, but it should include those. And so that's a challenge for all of us, both for us as a United Nations, and if I do have time, I can talk about the experience of Rwanda. But the third, it's earlier throughout today as well, we kept highlighting about the role of champions and mentors and leaders, both men and women, to create opportunities. And you have demonstrated that by illustrating with your community. So I am fascinated when you meet with your colleagues, kings and obas and emirs and traditional rulers. Do these conversations, this thing you've said here, does it animate the discussions among yourselves?
Well, Nigeria is a very big country. And Nigeria is actually, you can see it as a collection of a few countries put together. Different cultural backgrounds. And if I can roll back a bit, culture, which I see as the people's behavior, their tradition, their beliefs and their thinking, etc., etc. It is a function of the environment where they live. So people in the maritime, in the Niger Delta area, for instance, their cultural traits are quite different from those up in the north, in the desert, and so on. And secondly, of course, culture is not static. It's a function also of our worldview. And as knowledge expands, certain cultural traits and behaviors are falling away because we have a better understanding, and so on. But it's not static, and it's influenced by one another, and so on and so forth. But at the Nigeria level, we have the National Council of Traditional Rulers of Nigeria. We focus more on national issues, security, economy, and advise the government, and so on. At the state level and at the local level, then we learn from each other in terms of how do we manage children out of school, the girl-child problem, etc., etc. So at the local level, yes, but not at the national level, because then there's a lot of diversity and we focus on national issues. I went straight to the Women Empowerment Project Committee. But you see, out of COVID, driven by COVID, we started, we accelerated the program we started in 2017 at Onitsha to create a platform for our own community development. We have 3 operational arms: entrepreneurship development and leadership and entrepreneurial development, where we're creating entrepreneurs. We've got about close to 100 young men and women who 4 years ago were not doing anything. Today they are running their own businesses successfully. The state government finance organization gives them loans, but we want to take that over. Okay. The second one is the trying to create an IT hub for young, brilliant ones who can be creative in the digital lesson. And the third one is to create a microfinance institution, not a microfinance bank, institution, which does not need to get approval from central bank, and which does not go through the regulatory demands of the commercial banks and all of that. And that will now give us, we'll subscribe. I have people who can put up 50 million naira to give more loans to all these young entrepreneurs and our market women who get the microfinance loans and so on and so forth. So it's a program that builds the community up. And as I said, we have more women taking advantage of these opportunities than the men for the meantime. Thank you.
So 2 strands of thought emerge. One is that the traditional institution as a champion for change and transformation is not being fully targeted by all of us. And we do know that they may not have the same resonance in every society, but in most of Africa, the traditional institution has resonance. And so that's work for all of us to do, to see them as agents and champions of change and to transform perceptions and attitudes to be champions of change. But you raise a more fundamental question, which I'm sure everybody here is beginning to pick up. The role of traditional governance. It's almost like this traditional institution is creating more legitimacy with the constituents than with the formal institutions of the state. That the state is failing in its functions, and so the traditional governance institutions are stepping in to address those gaps, because you also want peace, but you want prosperity in your societies. And the question that does arise is these notions, this duality of power and governance, of legitimacy between traditional governance institutions and state institutions. And that sometimes, when you meet at your Council of State, it's actually when problems do arise, that it is the traditional governance structures that state institutions run to. So I don't know why we call it traditional governance. And what role in our governing arrangements can be constructed to respond to the yearnings and aspirations of Africans. That many of our people see the state as near failure or having failed, as having lost legitimacy, and there are big questions in Africa about how do you reconstruct the state, but how do you reconstruct governance and democracy in Africa and the role of traditional institutions in all of that? Would you like to offer some thoughts on this issue?
Well, there's a lot of debate going on. And even amongst us traditional rulers, there's no one view. Okay. The 1979 Constitution, is it 1979?
79, as amended repeatedly.
As amended, which is now in operation.
Yeah.
There's no word traditional ruler or traditional institution in that whole constitution. So the traditional institution is not recognized by the Nigerian government. Okay, at the state level, yes, then there's traditional councils, etc. But then the states vary. I know Imo State has created a fourth tier of government, which is where the traditional rulers play a role. The older traditional institutions, Ife, Ijebu-Ode, Onitsha, Benin, etc., our desire is to just leave us in the manner that the colonial government met us. We run our communities. I mean, I run my community. I have our security vigilante. We have an educational program. I talked about the entrepreneurship development. We've got a powerful health program run by our people all over the world. Okay, we have people in America, etc., and so on. And also, don't take away our source of revenue. Onitsha is the market and all that. So if we have that, we can run our own system and so on. But it's not unanimous. It's not general in the country, and the debate is on. And on the question of traditional rulers at the national level, debating about culture and women empowerment and inclusiveness, etc., I have to identify the Sultan of Sokoto, who has the Sultan Foundation, which is focused on elevating the place of the women, particularly the girl child. And he runs an international conference. And the former Emir of Kano also is a strong advocate of that, even though he's got 4 wives. Some people ask him, how come you manage 4 wives and so on? He says, well, he can afford it. But he's an apostle of, if you're married, you must be responsible towards your wife and your children, and give your wives opportunities to be themselves also.
This debate will not end here because we are in the search for governing arrangements that strengthen good governance, accountability, and responsiveness in Africa. And in having this conversation, I hope that this will trigger a debate across multiple platforms on the role of traditional governance in Africa. But I want to squeeze in one last question as we conclude, because I can see we're out of time. Colonialism succeeded largely by subrogating, suppressing our traditional institutions, approaches, even traditional medicine. And what COVID proved to all of us was that traditional medicine is alive and kicking. That in many parts of Africa, everybody went and got those leaves, those mint, those things that they heated, particularly as of the medicine. So and now you look across the room and look at the dresses of many of the men and the women. The reinvention of African culture and traditions in dance, in music, in cuisine. And so, as a parting word, as a royal father, your dress already exemplifies what you stand for. What's your message, not just to Soft Power Africa, but to all of us in their recovery of African culture and African traditions, and center staging them as key parts of our lives, but also of our governance?
Yes, I think the process is on. Unfortunately, the church has been even as strong a factor as colonialism in the attempt to destroy our cultures and make us turn away. And parts of Igbo land suffered quite a lot because they destroyed a whole lot of stuff. But Onitsha held very fast to our custom, to our tradition. And for a while, the church was fuming, but they've come to accept and they've come to realize, because of the reinterpretation of our culture and our tradition. And I've spoken to our bishops and archbishops, and they accept it. I mean, the kola nut is the same as the communion you get in the altar or on the altar. And it's more sacred, equally sacred. Let's not be blasphemous. And the other elements and so on. So we're at peace, and our priests and reverend sisters attend our cultural events. They join their age-grade societies to dance and to do things and so on and so forth. On the medical side, someone like Professor Morrissey, who is a world-famous pharmacologist and all of that, has his laboratory where all these traditional medical herbs are now being codified, because our people knew they worked, but they didn't know how they worked, but they knew that there were results. So there's a scientific application to all of that. There's a laboratory run in Edo State by Reverend Fathers, amazingly, which is doing exactly the same thing. And they're producing medication based on the national, on the traditional treatment system. So there's a convergence and there's a rediscovery. And it's a matter of how soon and how fast. Yes.
Your Majesty, in conclusion, I want to start by first offering an apology that as a true son of Igbo land, I should have offered His Majesty some kola nut.
I came with some. I have some. As a true traditional ruler, I carry kola nuts wherever I go.
Wonderful. Because I searched far and wide in Kigali. I searched my fellow Igbo people here. Nobody had kola nut. So that's why I didn't mention it at all.
Don't worry.
But my dear friends and colleagues, as we conclude this conversation, the re-envisioning of Africa, of our society, the challenge for equality has a key stakeholder institution in the traditional institution in Africa. And so we need to bring them into this conversation. And we have champions, and we need champions like His Majesty, because when the Majesty then speak, the rest of the community cannot go against His Majesty.
We'll talk about how to get more women into positions. And I was thinking of the example of the oil industry, where there was a need to get more Nigerians into the constructive side, the productive side, etc., and the ownership side also. Okay, basically called local content. That there should be more local content in the oil industry so that you don't take all the profit away. And the government has very strict regulations for the companies. You have to have X number of engineers, geologists, X number of women, etc., etc. We don't care where you get them, as long as they are Nigerians. If you want the illiterate engineers, take them there. It's your business. And the companies are forced to find the best and the brightest. Not just that, but to actually back off and train people. Even we have training programs for contractors who started as petty contractors doing little construction, and today they're doing multi-billion naira businesses and all that. I think it can be done also on the women's side and so on. And then the boards I chair, I have to say that there's plenty of inclusiveness. Unilever, I have a board of 9, 4 women, 5 men. One of the men is basically not there all the time, so you can say we're almost balanced. 2 executive directors, women, and 2 non-executive directors, and they're all very powerful people. Diamond Bank, I had the same inclusivity. So I think the struggle is on, and I think we're going to win. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, there are champions in our traditional institutions in Africa. Go find your king, go find your chief in your country, in your community, engage them. There are many types like Obi or furniture, and that's a good note to end this conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Majesty.